circle of success just keeps repeating itself, and you get better. Hi there, welcome to today's vlog. Today we're going to talk about 5 things that are holding you back, or might be holding you back as a saxophone player. Maybe these 5 things don't apply to you, but this list I've come up with is a kind of combination of what I've experienced from people, teaching people for the last 20 years, what people have told me kind of via YouTube, what comes in via your Q&A questions, comments, and just general conversations. And the first thing that I think holds a lot of people back is bad equipment. Now, I understand for most people that it's a hobby, okay? You do not want to be spending £10,000 on a saxophone. But if you have got £10,000 to spend on a saxophone, I would suggest you spend £5,000 on the saxophone and another £5,000 on kind of tuition and other things, which we'll come to in a minute. But let's talk about gear. Now, I spoke in this vlog a long time ago that a lot of you probably haven't seen because you've kind of joined after I made the vlog. But I said then, and I stand by it now, that there are an awful lot of cheap, rubbish saxophones flooding the market today that are not worth your money. There are also a lot of good saxophones coming onto the market in the mid-range that might be worth your money that I've not had a chance to play yet. There needs to be this kind of bottom end where you don't go below, because if you go below that, the chances are you're buying a load of rubbish. Now, you might say, but I just want to get started. But you've got to remember, if it's a rubbish instrument, it's going to be very difficult to keep it in tune, which means that if you're half decent at music, you'll know whether it's in tune or not. It's going to break a lot. There are going to be springs falling off it. There are going to be leaks within the instrument that are just not going to be conducive to being able to make a good sound. It's just not going to sound great if you start playing it with other people. It's just going to be like, oh dear me. People are going to think, oh, that person's terrible. You might not be terrible, but it's definitely going to put you off. So having good equipment is really important. So where do you start with good equipment? Well, I've not been paid for this endorsement. I've not even been asked to give it. In fact, there's probably certain people who wish I probably didn't say this, but I always recommend the Yamaha student models if you're starting out. They're not cheap, but they're very, very, very well made. They just keep playing people, and they can take quite a bit of abuse, knocks and dings that tend to happen, especially with younger saxophone players. So I would suggest definitely the Yamaha student model. You can then start to go up and upgrade from then. You can maybe get yourself hold of a decent second-hand Yanagasawa or something else like that. There are other models, and I can almost hear the comments being typed in as we go. I can only recommend what I've played and what I recommend, okay? You might think that other models and makes are perfectly suitable, but I can't recommend them because I don't think they are. The second thing that's holding a lot of people back is not having a teacher. You cannot possibly learn everything you need to know, especially as a beginner, off YouTube. I'm sorry, you can't. You need someone to guide you through those initial stages. Preferably a saxophone specialist, but you know what? You could get away with a clarinet player or a flautist teaching you some stuff at the beginning, but really, you need to get a good saxophone teacher. There are plenty of saxophone teachers all over the world who I'm sure will be willing to give you a few lessons, to give you some pointers. There's a beginner's course on my Cambridge Saxophone website which takes you through, but ideally, you should do the beginner's course alongside doing some tuition with other people if you can. There are people like, do Skype lessons. There's loads and loads of things around. There's no excuse these days to be able to say, well, I can't get hold of a good saxophone player in my area. Hey, there's Skype, there's online stuff. The third one is lack of focused practice. Now, what I mean by that, and often a teacher can really help you with that, is that it's all well and good saying, I'm practicing an hour a day, or I'm practicing 2 hours a day, or I'm running my scales all the time. But if you're not running them with the metronome accurately, or if you're not actually playing the pieces correctly, yes, you're playing, which is great, but you're not actually focusing it in and concentrating on what your weaknesses are. A lot of research shows us that if you practice around the edges of your ability, if you're really it's hard practice and you're really kind of focusing in on a bit that you can't play and then being able to play it, if you really focus in on that, that's the most efficient way to practice and how you get better. And I always talk to my students about 2 circles, the circle of success and the circle of failure, okay? I might be able to draw a circle here, but I bet I can't. So anyway, let's talk about it. So let's talk about the circle of success first of all. So the student shows up at their saxophone lesson, they've practiced that week, they've done the work the teacher's asked to do, which means they come into the lesson feeling motivated, ready to learn something new. Then they kind of we work on something new in the lesson and they go through lots and lots of new material which leaves them kind of inspired and ready to move forward and kind of moving into the next lesson. They go home and they practice and they're ready to practice and they work through it and the teacher's happy with them and they're happy with the teacher and everything's great, and this circle of success just keeps repeating itself and you get better. Or the circle of failure, where the student hasn't really done any practice or hasn't done the practice the teacher's asked them to do, so they show up to the lesson or they sit down in front of the computer for the lesson and they're feeling a bit apprehensive because they haven't really done the work, and there's kind of all those things back from school, even if you're an adult, where you feel, I haven't done what the teacher's asked me to do here. And so they're a bit nervous, they're not quite happy. The teacher's not exactly happy with them because they haven't done the work that they've asked them to do, because the teacher knows what, if they're a good teacher, they know how to make people successful. And so, there's kind of this atmosphere of, okay, let's go over this again, let's work on this material again. And so both parties feel a little bit annoyed with each other, okay, and with themselves to a certain extent. The teacher's annoyed that they feel they haven't got the patience to kind of deal with it maybe. And the student, and then they kind of, well, I don't want to practice this week because, I didn't practice last week and it wasn't very good. And then we get on this circle of failure and that leads to the end and you don't end up playing the saxophone anymore, and it's a shame. Or you change teachers and the same thing happens again and you keep saying, well, I just can't find a teacher that works for me. I have to ask you, if that's the case, are you on the circle of success or are you on the circle of failure? And building into that thing about practice needs to be an idea of goals. You and your teacher need to set goals about where you'd like to be on the instrument. Kind of where would you like to be in 6 months? Where would you like to be in 12 months? Where would you like to be in 10 years? I often say to my students, what's your Matrix dream? If you were in the Matrix, if you've never seen the film, it's probably lost on you. But there's a scene in the first Matrix film where Trinity she needs to be able to fly a helicopter and she can't fly it, and they say, can you fly the helicopter? I can't yet. She phones up, they dial a program into her and suddenly within 15 seconds she can fly this helicopter. And I have to say to students, if we were living within a Matrix, and let's not go down that whole route, but if we were living in that Matrix, what would you want me to be able to put inside it? What would the program be able to be that you could suddenly be able to do? For me, it's kind of probably some particular Brecker solo or something else like that. Now, we don't live in that, so you have to work on it. But there is a strategy that means that you could end up, and I could end up playing that Brecker solo if I was focused and I set a goal of being able to do it. I spoke about it in this vlog. One of the main things that motivates me to practice is pure fear. I have concerts coming up and gigs coming up that I know that, especially with this classical recital coming up in the summer, I've got to practice these pieces or I am going to fail on stage. And that is a huge motivator for me. That's what keeps me up at night, is being able to make sure that I need to be able to do it. And at the moment, life is so incredibly busy that I don't get time to practice. And, at the back of my mind, even this morning, washing up the breakfast dishes was going, recital's about 2 months away, you still can't play one of those pieces yet, and how's that other one doing? So in a way, that the fear thing from the goals can often be a great motivator. It's not always the best thing. And that leads me on to my final bit. Point 5, enjoy it. Playing a musical instrument isn't heart surgery or brain surgery. If you mess it up, if I mess up in August, my ego's going to be dented and people will be upset and maybe people won't come to a concert, which is pretty bad for a professional musician. I will practice, don't worry. If you're coming, I'll make sure I'm there. But nobody dies if you get it wrong. If it goes wrong on stage, it might feel the most crushing, horrible, difficult thing for you. But nobody dies if you get it wrong. And so remember that. We're not dealing with life and death situations here when it comes to playing an instrument, especially if you're playing it as a hobby and as an interest. You're supposed to enjoy it. But those other 4 things will help you enjoy it, because we all like to get better. And if you're stuck in a rut, can I ask you to go back and look over those other 4 things, and this one as well maybe, and ask yourself which one are you not doing? Have you got poor equipment? That's relatively easily solved. Do you have a good teacher? Well, again, relatively easy solved, not as easy solved as the first one, but remember that the gear is important, but a teacher's going to do more. I often say to my students, just remember, when you go into a music shop or you go to a music store's website, they don't earn a penny from you unless you buy something. And a saxophone teacher is always interested in making you better, okay? Lack of focus practice. Are you focusing on your practice? Have you got clear goals set in mind about what you're going to do? And finally, are you enjoying it? Because that's really, really important. So Storm Hannah is upon us. Recently in Britain, we've decided to start naming storms after people, just as you do in the States. I'm not sure that roof over the road is so securely put down.
Prominence as one half of the Boston-based Hook Cabaret groundbreaking works as the fan-funded Theatre is Evil, which made it.
Now, two things I need to get better at doing recently is listening back to Tim Ferriss's amazing podcast. I've read a number of Tim's books. I think he's a great podcaster. The only thing is, for his podcast, they do go on a little bit too long for most of my journeys. I tend to listen to podcasts in the car because I just find it easier to listen to podcasts than music. I'm also keen to keep my Patreon going. There are a number of you who are on there and you're amazing, but I want to make my Patreon grow, and I've uploaded more saxophone lessons. You know, if you're after teaching but you feel that kind of subscribing to my Cambridge Saxophone website or booking a Skype lesson is too far for you at the moment, you're not quite sure, but you want to delve a little deeper, then I can definitely recommend going to Patreon, because I've put a number of saxophone lessons up there. I also have an exclusive Patreon only feed for just $2 a month, and I'm uploading gig tracks, other concert recordings, some videos, doing a new video series called Duos with Dan, loads of stuff up on Patreon, so please go and check out my Patreon. Meanwhile, I'm going to carry on checking out this podcast with Amanda Palmer. Amanda Palmer is somebody I support on Patreon. Just put a few dollars in a month, and it's great. It's great to know that even just that little small contribution is going towards an artist I really want to support and really want to hear what they create.
Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord.
Tell everybody what you've done. Broken both your wrists, haven't you? Hold them up a bit. And that's what happens when you fall out of trees, everybody. But you're going to get better soon, aren't you?
What, jumping a branch?
Yeah, but it's very frustrating for you, isn't it? Because you can't do anything. So, we're not that accident prone.